What do vultures and falcons have in common? To many, these birds are symbols of death, fearsome creatures soaring across the skies with ominous wings. But in the ancient world, particularly in Egypt and Nubia, these same birds were revered, not feared. They were much more than predators of the air. They embodied the delicate balance between life and death, renewal and decay. In fact, they were powerful symbols, representing not only the end, but also the beginning, the protector and the destroyer, the cycle that governs all existence. So why did these birds hold such a profound place in the hearts and minds of these ancient cultures? How did ancient Egyptian and Nubian societies view vultures and falcons? Were they seen as harbingers of doom or as protectors of life and guides for the soul? What is it about these magnificent creatures that transcended their mere physical forms and became so deeply intertwined with the spiritual and cultural fabric of these ancient civilizations? Let's explore. In the sacred lands of Egypt and Nubia, vultures and falcons were not mere animals. They were divine messengers, often woven into the very myths that defined the world. In Egyptian temples, their images were carved into walls and etched into tombs, not just as depictions of nature, but as symbols of gods and goddesses who governed the realms of the living and the dead. The vulture, especially, was seen as a guardian of the dead, while the falcon soared as a symbol of protection and power, representing the divine authority of the pharaohs. These birds were present in both daily life and the spiritual realm, influencing everything from art and religion to burial practices and royal iconography. Their significance stretched far beyond their physical presence, embodying life's cyclical nature, where death and rebirth are forever linked. Before we dive into the full story, take a moment to reflect. These birds, once the embodiment of divine forces, still fly through the air today. Their stories are not just remnants of the past. They are living, breathing myths that continue to shape our understanding of life and death. So, as we explore their powerful symbolism, ask yourself, what role do these ancient symbols play in our lives now, and what lessons might they still offer us today? Vultures, with their ominous flight, have always been associated with death in many cultures. Their haunting silhouette against the sky, circling above the fallen, marks them as creatures of decay, of endings. But in ancient Egypt, the vulture had a much deeper and more complex significance. It was not just a bird of death, it was a guardian, a protector, and even a symbol of rebirth. In a land where the afterlife was as important as life itself, vultures played an integral role in the cosmic balance between death and renewal. They were not feared as mere harbingers of doom, but revered as sacred beings with a vital purpose in the eternal cycle of life. At the heart of vulture symbolism in Egypt is the goddess Nekhbet, depicted as a vulture-headed woman or a vulture itself. As one of the most powerful deities in the Egyptian pantheon, Nekhbet was the protector of Upper Egypt and a guardian of the dead. Her wings, spread wide, symbolized divine protection, and she was often shown hovering over the pharaoh in battle, offering strength and safety. Her vulture form embodied the connection between the earth and the divine, as well as the idea that death was a transition, not an end. To the Egyptians, the vulture was a maternal figure, hovering protectively over the living and the dead, ensuring the cycle of life continued without interruption. But vultures were more than just symbolic protectors. Their role in the natural world made them a fitting embodiment of both death and renewal. As scavengers, vultures clean the earth, devouring the remains of animals that have passed. This act of clearing the decay paves the way for new life to flourish. In this way, vultures symbolized the necessary decay that allows for rebirth. They were seen as purifiers, part of the natural process that allowed the earth to heal and regenerate. In Egypt, death was not a permanent end, but a step in the cycle of transformation, and vultures embodied that transformation, ushering death out and preparing the ground for new life to rise. In Nubian culture, the vulture held similar reverence, though its symbolism took on distinct forms. Much like their Egyptian counterparts, vultures were seen as guides for the souls of the dead. The Nubians believed that these birds would carry the spirits of the departed to the afterlife, much like psychopomps in other cultures. They acted as intermediaries between the earthly realm and the divine, guiding souls through the trials of the afterlife and ensuring they reached their final resting place in peace. Vultures were also linked to the sun god, symbolizing the sun's role in both destruction and creation. Just as the sun set each day, only to rise again the next, vultures embodied this cyclical nature of death and renewal. The imagery of vultures was widespread in both Egyptian and Nubian art, particularly in funerary contexts. In Egypt, the vulture was often depicted in tombs and burial sites, symbolizing the protection of the soul in its journey through the afterlife. The presence of Nekbet in these scenes emphasized the bird's role as both protector and guide. Vultures appeared on the crowns of pharaohs, further solidifying their association with the royal protection of the dead. These symbols reminded the living that death was not the end, but a transition to another realm, where they would be watched over by the divine. In Nubia, the vulture also appeared prominently in art, especially in connection with royal and funerary practices. Vulture imagery adorned the burial chambers of Nubian kings and queens, often depicted soaring above the deceased, ensuring their safe passage to the afterlife. The vulture's association with the divine and its role as a guide for the departed emphasized the importance of the bird in both spiritual and earthly matters. Through this imagery, vultures became intertwined with the concepts of immortality and divine protection, ensuring that the deceased were guarded and remembered long after their earthly bodies had returned to the soil. Through these cultural depictions and religious beliefs, vultures were not simply creatures of death. They were symbols of the renewal that follows death. In Egypt and Nubia, they were seen as sacred beings who facilitated the transition from the physical world to the spiritual one, clearing away the old to make way for the new. Their role in the natural world as scavengers, feeding on decay to nourish the earth, mirrored their divine purpose in the cosmic order, transforming death into a necessary step for the regeneration of life. In a world where life, death, and rebirth were intimately connected, vultures were not just birds of prey. They were essential symbols of the eternal cycle. If vultures were deeply tied to the themes of death and renewal, then the falcon was equally woven into the fabric of power and protection. In ancient Egypt, the falcon soared high above the land, not just as a bird of prey, but as a divine figure embodying the very essence of the sky itself. The falcon, most notably represented by Horus, the powerful god of the sun and kingship, was a symbol of divine authority, strength, and protection. To the ancient Egyptians, the falcon wasn't just a bird. It was a living manifestation of the god's will, a symbol that commanded both reverence and awe. The falcon's role as the emblem of Horus was paramount in Egyptian mythology. Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, was often depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, his eyes representing the sun and the moon. Horus was not just a god of the skies. He was the divine protector of Egypt, the embodiment of the pharaoh's power. To the people of ancient Egypt, the pharaohs themselves were living representations of Horus on earth, and the falcon became their symbol. The pharaoh's crown, often adorned with a falcon or the image of Horus, marked them as the earthly embodiment of the god's power, entrusted with the duty of maintaining order, known as Ma'at, over the kingdom. But the falcon's symbolism went beyond the throne. It was also intricately connected to the realm of the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that upon death, the soul would embark on a journey through the underworld, seeking judgment before the gods. In this journey, the falcon was there as a guide, often depicted as a protective figure that ensured the soul's safe passage. The falcon's keen eyesight, sharp and vigilant, was a metaphor for the soul's ability to see and navigate the unseen, making it a guardian on both the earthly and spiritual planes. The bird's majestic flight was believed to transcend the physical world, soaring between the realms of life and death, guiding those who had passed to their final resting place. Falcons also played an important role in Egyptian society beyond mythology. Falconry, the practice of training falcons to hunt, was a royal pastime and a symbol of elite status. The ancient Egyptians were skilled falconers, using the birds in hunting to capture small game, such as birds and rabbits. The relationship between the Egyptians and their falcons was one of mutual respect. The falcon, with its sharp hunting skills and speed, was seen as a reflection of the divine connection between the people and the gods. Falconry, therefore, was not only a sport, but also a ritual that reinforced the pharaoh's connection to the divine, embodying both royal authority and divine protection. Beyond Egypt, in Nubia, the falcon retained its symbolism of power and protection, albeit with slight regional variations. In Nubian culture, falcons were often associated with the sun god, who was believed to reign supreme over both life and death. Like the Egyptians, the Nubians also saw the falcon as a divine protector, one whose role was not only to guard the soul in the afterlife, but to defend against chaos and disorder. The falcon was seen as an intermediary between the living and the divine, ensuring that the pharaoh or ruler had the protection of the gods while navigating the complexities of life and death. In Nubian tombs and art, the falcon's image was often included as a reminder of the eternal strength and vigilance required for the afterlife. The falcon's role in the natural world further elevated its status in both Egyptian and Nubian culture. As a bird of prey, the falcon was a symbol of precision, power, and focus. Its hunting abilities mirrored the divine qualities of the gods it represented: strength, clarity, and an unyielding will. In a world where the gods were seen as active participants in human affairs, the falcon was more than just a symbol. It was a tool, a vessel for divine intervention. Whether soaring across the vast desert skies or perched high upon a royal scepter, the falcon remained a constant, powerful reminder of the divine protection that was woven into the very fabric of life in ancient Egypt and Nubia. In both cultures, the falcon's connection to the sun, royalty, and the divine made it an enduring symbol of power, protection, and guidance. It wasn't just a bird, it was the living embodiment of the gods themselves, a symbol that could bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. And as Horus protected the land, so too did the falcon protect the soul, soaring through the skies with eyes sharp enough to see not only the world below, but the eternal truth beyond. Both vultures and falcons in ancient Egypt and Nubia were not merely physical animals, but divine symbols, representing larger themes of life, death, and the eternal cycle of the cosmos. Their significance was woven into the myths and beliefs that guided these civilizations' understanding of the world. In fact, the role of birds of prey was not confined to the material world. They were seen as critical agents in the afterlife. In Egyptian mythology, the afterlife was not an ending, but a continuation, a journey that required protection, guidance, and purification. Vultures and falcons played pivotal roles in this journey, ensuring that the soul was safely guided through trials, judgment, and ultimately, rebirth. Egyptians believed that death was merely a transition from one state to another. To cross from the physical world to the spiritual realm required navigating a dangerous and uncertain path, fraught with challenges. Here, the role of vultures and falcons became crucial. The falcon, as the embodiment of Horus, acted as the soul's protector, guiding it through the underworld and safeguarding it from the forces of chaos. The heart of the deceased was weighed in the hall of judgment, and only those who had lived a life of righteousness were allowed to pass. The falcon's sharp sight and powerful presence symbolized the clarity needed to face judgment. With Horus watching over the soul, the deceased was assured safe passage, protected by divine strength and order. But the vulture, too, had an essential role in the spiritual journey. Known for its role in the natural world as a cleaner of death and decay, the vulture was a symbol of purification. This aspect of the vulture's nature was reflected in its mythological significance. As a protector of the dead, the vulture played a central role in the purification of the soul. In some Egyptian beliefs, the deceased's soul was said to be purified and reborn through the vulture's watchful eye. The act of death was not seen as an end, but a necessary step toward renewal, an idea that the vulture symbolized through its role in clearing the earth of decay, allowing new life to flourish. The afterlife, therefore, was not an isolated realm, but deeply connected to the life that preceded it. The gods, through their various avatars like Horus the falcon and Nekhbet the vulture, ensured that the cycle of death and rebirth was preserved. In funerary practices, these birds were depicted in tomb art, reminding the living of the divine protection they would receive in death. The vulture's imagery in the tombs of the pharaohs, as well as in royal regalia, was meant to ensure the protection of the soul in its journey to the afterlife. Similarly, the falcon's image in tombs and on royal crowns emphasized the connection between the ruler's divine authority and the cosmic order, reinforcing the idea that death was part of a larger, ongoing cosmic balance. The use of vultures and falcons in Egyptian art was not just symbolic but also practical. These birds were included in burial rituals where their images adorned tombs, sarcophagi, and funerary equipment. The images were meant to invoke the protection of the gods and ensure the deceased's safe passage. The falcon, often represented by the god Horus, was frequently painted on the walls of royal tombs, ensuring that the pharaohs were forever watched over. The vulture, too, appeared in funerary art, especially in the tombs of elite individuals, further emphasizing its protective role. In Nubian culture, the connection between birds of prey and the afterlife was also profound. The Nubians shared many similarities with the Egyptians in their beliefs about death and the afterlife, but their practices also had their own distinct characteristics. Like the Egyptians, they believed that the soul needed to be protected and guided after death, and the falcon was often depicted in tomb art to symbolize divine protection. The vulture, too, appeared in Nubian art, representing the role of purification and the transition to the afterlife. These birds were not only symbols of death, but also guardians of the soul, ensuring that it was not lost, but led safely to the next life. Through these ancient practices and beliefs, vultures and falcons became more than just creatures of the natural world. They became symbols of life's eternal cycle, with death as a part of a much larger, interconnected process. The afterlife was a continuation of the divine order, and the role of these birds was to ensure that the soul remained protected, purified, and ultimately reborn. The art and iconography of both Egypt and Nubia reflected this belief, embedding the vulture and falcon into the very heart of their understanding of existence, death, and the divine. As protectors of the dead, these birds ensured that the cosmic balance was maintained, ushering the souls of the deceased into the eternal cycle of renewal. While Egypt often takes the spotlight, what about their neighbors to the south, Nubia? This ancient civilization, rich with its own myths and traditions, shared many cultural elements with Egypt, but it also developed its own unique interpretations of the symbols and creatures that were so significant in the Egyptian worldview. Among these, vultures and falcons held a sacred place in Nubian culture as well, playing vital roles in both the spiritual and political life of the kingdom. While the symbolism of these birds in Nubia often mirrored their Egyptian counterparts, there were key differences that reflected the distinct religious and cultural nuances of the Nubians. Nubians, like the Egyptians, saw vultures and falcons as powerful spiritual symbols, but their interpretations were often infused with different mythological meanings. The vulture, in particular, was revered as a protector and guide in Nubian culture, much as it was in Egypt. However, the Nubians also had a vulture goddess who played a central role in their religious practices. This goddess, known as Nefertum in some texts, was associated with the divine forces of creation and purification. As in Egypt, the vulture symbolized the connection between the living and the dead, but in Nubia, the goddess was more directly linked to the land and its fertility, as well as to the purification of souls. While Egyptian mythology emphasized the vulture's role as a protector of the dead through the goddess Nekhbet, Nubian deities connected to vultures were seen as sources of divine cleansing, ensuring the safe journey of the soul to the afterlife. In Nubian culture, the falcon, much like in Egypt, was a potent symbol of power, protection, and divine authority. However, while the Egyptian falcon was primarily associated with Horus and the royal power of the pharaoh, the Nubian falcon was closely tied to the sun and the king's divine right to rule. The falcon's sharp sight and soaring flight were considered symbols of the king's ability to see and protect his people, as well as to maintain harmony in both the earthly and spiritual realms. This divine connection was reflected in the imagery of falcons that adorned the royal regalia of Nubian rulers. These birds, often displayed on the crowns or on sacred objects, emphasized the king's role as a mediator between the gods and the people. In Nubian burial practices, the symbolism of vultures and falcons was also closely connected to their beliefs in the afterlife. Like their Egyptian counterparts, the Nubians believed that the soul's journey to the afterlife required protection, guidance, and purification. Vultures, as symbols of death and renewal, were seen as guides for the departed, ensuring that they navigated the spiritual realm safely. Falcons, on the other hand, represented the king's divine protection, often depicted in tombs and on funerary objects to safeguard the deceased. In royal Nubian tombs, the imagery of vultures and falcons was used not just as a symbol of power, but as a means of ensuring that the king or queen would receive protection in the afterlife, continuing their divine rule from beyond the grave. The use of these birds in Nubian art and symbolism was not only a reflection of religious beliefs, but also of the political power of the monarchy. Nubian royalty, much like their Egyptian counterparts, adopted the imagery of falcons to reinforce their divine status and their connection to the gods. The falcon's sharp, unblinking gaze was seen as a metaphor for the ruler's ability to maintain control and bring order to the land. This imagery extended beyond the king's own life, symbolizing the eternal rule of the monarch and their ability to protect the kingdom from threats both seen and unseen. Just as the falcon was revered for its strength and vigilance, the Nubian king was seen as the ultimate protector of his people, guided by the gods. In many ways, the Nubians took the symbols of vultures and falcons that had such deep significance in Egypt and adapted them to their own worldview. While both cultures recognized these birds as divine protectors and guides, the Nubians placed a greater emphasis on their role in the continuity of royal power and the land's fertility. The connection between the falcon and the sun, as well as the vulture's association with purification, were central to the Nubian belief in a divine right to rule, one that transcended death and ensured the protection of the kingdom. As we explore these symbols, it becomes clear that in both Egypt and Nubia, vultures and falcons were not just birds of the natural world. They were divine intermediaries bridging the realms of the living and the dead. They were symbols of power, purity, and protection, ensuring that the sacred order of life, death, and rebirth was maintained for both the gods and the rulers of the land. The prominence of these birds in Nubian royal iconography and funerary practices highlights their profound importance, not just as symbols of the afterlife, but as living embodiments of the divine forces that guided and protected the kingdom. The regal falcon and the purifying vulture were both witnesses to the past and guardians of the future, immortalized in art, culture, and mythology. What do vultures and falcons have to do with the ancient Egyptian and Nubian ideas of the afterlife? More than you might think. These birds were not just symbolic creatures, they were living embodiments of the cosmic forces that governed life, death, and rebirth. They represented the cyclical nature of existence, where death was not an end, but a passage, a transition from one state to another. Both the vulture and the falcon were seen as divine intermediaries, guides, and protectors, ensuring that the soul's journey through the afterlife would be one of transformation and eventual resurrection. In both Egyptian and Nubian belief systems, the afterlife was understood as a journey that began at death and continued through a series of trials and judgments. The soul's safe passage from one realm to the next was paramount, and vultures and falcons played crucial roles in guiding and protecting the soul along the way. Vultures in particular were viewed as guides for the dead, especially in Egyptian mythology. Their role as scavengers of the earth symbolized their ability to clear away the old, making way for the new. In the afterlife, this was seen as a purifying act, cleansing the soul of its earthly attachments and preparing it for the rebirth that awaited. The vulture's ability to feast on death was not just about decay, it was about renewal, removing what was no longer needed so that what was pure could rise again. The falcon, on the other hand, was the embodiment of divine protection and clarity. In Egyptian belief, the falcon was closely associated with Horus, the god of kingship, the sun, and the protector of the living pharaoh. But Horus was also a god of resurrection. The falcon's sharp vision, its ability to see clearly from above, symbolized the soul's need for guidance and divine oversight during its journey through the underworld. Just as Horus watched over Egypt from the skies, the falcon was seen as a protector of the soul, ensuring that it was not lost or led astray. The falcon's role in the afterlife was not just to guide, it was to shield the soul from the dangers of the underworld, providing both physical and spiritual protection as it passed through the trials of the afterlife. In both Egypt and Nubia, the concept of resurrection and rebirth was tied to the cyclical nature of these birds. The vulture, through its role in clearing away the old and the dead, symbolized the necessary decay that allowed for new life to take root. In this way, it mirrored the idea of resurrection, a concept deeply embedded in Egyptian religious thought. In the myth of Osiris, for example, Osiris is murdered by his brother Set, and his body is dismembered and scattered. But through the mourning and actions of his wife Isis, Osiris is resurrected, reborn into the afterlife. This myth of death and rebirth was echoed in the symbolism of vultures, which participated in the natural cycle of decay, cleansing, and renewal. The vulture's role was integral to this process. By purging the earth of decay, it made space for new growth, just as Osiris's death made way for new life through his resurrection. The falcon's connection to Horus further deepened the association of birds with resurrection. Horus's own story was one of death and rebirth. His father Osiris had been killed, and Horus spent much of his life seeking revenge and justice. In the end, Horus triumphs over Set, symbolizing the victory of life over death. The falcon, in this context, was not only a symbol of kingship, but also a representation of divine protection and resurrection. Just as the falcon soared through the sky, watching over Egypt, it was also believed that it guided the souls of the departed, ensuring their protection as they navigated the challenges of the afterlife. In this way, the falcon embodied both the life-giving sun and the protective force that would ensure the soul's safe passage to its final resting place. The myth of Osiris and the role of birds in his resurrection also reflected the larger Egyptian belief in the afterlife as a process of continuous renewal. Osiris, who was once the god of the living, became the god of the dead, overseeing the souls of the departed. His resurrection, made possible by his wife Isis and the actions of the gods, was seen as the ultimate example of the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth. The birds, especially the falcon representing Horus, served as messengers, ensuring that the souls of the departed could travel safely from the realm of the living to the afterlife. In this way, vultures and falcons were not simply guides for the dead. They were essential to the cycle of resurrection, ensuring that death was not the end but a transformative step towards spiritual renewal. Through their roles as protectors and guides, vultures and falcons were woven into the fabric of Egyptian and Nubian ideas of the afterlife. These birds symbolized the cyclical nature of existence, death leading to rebirth, decay making way for new life. They were the guardians of the soul's journey, ensuring that the transition from life to death was not a loss, but a necessary part of a much larger process of renewal. Whether it was the vulture's purifying presence or the falcon's protective gaze, these birds played vital roles in maintaining the balance between life and death, guiding souls through the trials of the afterlife and toward their eventual resurrection. The symbolism of vultures and falcons hasn't faded. In fact, it's still relevant today. These ancient birds of prey, once revered as divine protectors and powerful symbols of life, death, and rebirth, continue to soar across our modern landscape, influencing everything from art and pop culture to sports teams and logos. In the world of modern art, these birds often serve as potent symbols of strength, resilience, and transformation. Whether portrayed in contemporary illustrations or used as motifs in graphic design, the vulture and falcon remain timeless symbols that transcend their ancient roots, speaking to universal themes of survival and protection. In pop culture, both birds have appeared as emblematic creatures in movies, books, and television shows, often embodying the fierce and protective qualities they once represented in ancient Egyptian and Nubian beliefs. From animated films to action-packed blockbusters, the falcon often represents a hero flying above the chaos with the clarity of vision and a sense of justice, echoing its role as the divine protector. Similarly, the vulture, while still often associated with death, has also become a symbol of renewal, representing the cyclical nature of life and the idea that from decay comes new growth. Both birds have found new relevance in modern storytelling, carrying with them the weight of ancient symbolism. Sports teams, too, have adopted these powerful creatures as mascots, drawing on their attributes of strength, resilience, and leadership. Teams named after falcons, vultures, and other birds of prey embody the same virtues that the ancient Egyptians and Nubians sought to channel through these creatures: the falcon's unyielding vision and power, and the vulture's role in purifying and renewing. Whether on a field of competition or in the arena of life, these birds symbolize the relentless drive to overcome challenges, protect what matters, and emerge victorious. These birds remain powerful symbols centuries after the fall of the ancient civilizations that first worshipped them, because they represent universal qualities that resonate with people across cultures and time periods. Vultures and falcons are more than just creatures of the natural world. They are metaphors for strength, resilience, and transformation. Their enduring presence in modern culture serves as a reminder that even in death, there is the potential for rebirth, and that protection and vision are qualities we all strive to embody. From death to renewal, from decay to protection, vultures and falcons embody the eternal balance that was so central to the cultures of ancient Egypt and Nubia. These birds, revered as divine symbols, were more than just part of the natural world. They were guardians of life's cycles, ensuring the safe passage of souls, the preservation of divine order, and the promise of rebirth. In both Egyptian and Nubian cultures, the vulture and falcon represented not just death or destruction, but the profound forces of transformation and protection. Their lasting symbolism continues to inspire and guide us, reminding us of the delicate balance between life and death, and the power of renewal that resides in every ending. If you've learned something new today about these fascinating creatures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Leave a comment telling us your thoughts or questions about these birds and their symbolism. Whether you're fascinated by the divine roles they played in ancient cultures or intrigued by their lasting influence in our modern world, we'd love to hear from you. So join the conversation and keep these ancient stories alive as we continue to honor the timeless symbolism of vultures and falcons.